The nature of war is changing. There has been a new way of waging war between nations. Why does this matter? For centuries, conflict meant direct clashes between nations, armies meeting on battlefields, empires expanding through conquest. But in our lifetime, we've witnessed a profound transformation in how powerful countries compete. This is the era of proxy wars, where superpowers avoid direct confrontation but fuel violence elsewhere to pursue their interests. These significant powers strategically support local factions to advance their interests without risking open warfare, fighting a war not on the battlefield but via alliances and covert maneuvers with an inevitable human cost. The chart before us shows something surprising. While traditional wars between states have declined since World War II, another form of conflict has risen dramatically. One where nations fight not with their own soldiers but through others. From Syria to Sudan, Ukraine to Yemen, these conflicts are reshaping global politics with devastating consequences. Unlike traditional wars, proxy conflicts do not involve two nations facing off directly. Instead, more powerful nations sponsor groups, militias, or even entire governments to act as their proxies. These conflicts are often prolonged, leading to long-term instability and humanitarian crises. A proxy war is a conflict fought by one or more major powers that do not themselves become directly involved. These wars are characterized by the involvement of powerful nations that avoid direct military confrontation and orchestrate battles through surrogate forces. The trend of indirect warfare has grown since 1945. The end of World War II saw a decline in direct state-to-state wars, but that did not mean an era of peace. Instead, conflicts became internal, but with external involvement, leading to what scholars term internationalized civil wars. Why proxy wars? Three main reasons. Nuclear deterrence. The detonation of atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki fundamentally changed how powerful nations approached warfare. The threat of mutual destruction made direct war between nuclear-armed states almost unthinkable. Proxy wars offered a way to exert influence without escalating into nuclear confrontation. For example, during the Korean War, the US and Soviet Union avoided direct engagement, instead supporting South Korea and North Korea, respectively. The second one is plausible deniability. Proxy wars allow powerful nations to avoid direct accountability. Countries can secretly or indirectly fund armed factions, supply weapons, or train rebels while publicly denying involvement. This was evident in the Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s, where the U.S. secretly funded Nicaraguan rebels, Contras, despite an official embargo. Proxy wars are cheaper than invasion. Direct military interventions require massive troop deployments, logistical support, and financial resources. Proxy wars allow states to achieve geopolitical goals at a fraction of the cost. The Soviet Union's support for the Viet Cong in Vietnam, which drained U.S. resources and morale, is a classic example of this strategy in action. Perhaps the most notorious proxy wars in history happened during the Cold War period between 1945 and 1991, a standoff between the U.S. and Soviet Russia that saw no direct bloodshed between the two, but plenty between the two lands, spanning Cuba to Korea. The Cold War, 1947 to 1991, saw an explosion of proxy conflicts. The US and USSR used developing nations as battlegrounds to assert dominance without directly fighting each other. Some of the most notable Cold War proxy wars include Vietnam War, 1955-1975. The most significant death toll during the Cold War was amassed in Vietnam during the so-called Indochina Wars, which included the Vietnam War, claiming 3.8 million lives between 1955 and 1984. The U.S. backed South Vietnam against the Communist North, which received Soviet and Chinese support. Over 3 million people died, including 58,000 Americans. Afghan-Soviet War, 1979-1989. The USSR invaded Afghanistan to support its communist government. The U.S. countered by arming the Mujahideen resistance, a strategy that contributed to the rise of extremist factions, including Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda. For example, the U.S. and its allies, including Britain and Germany, abrupt withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan has been widely condemned as a catalyst for the Taliban's almost immediate takeover afterwards. Currently, the number of Afghan refugees is among the top nationalities seeking asylum in the UK, with 10,872 new applications in 2022. Angolan Civil War, 1975-2002. The USSR and Cuba supported the Marxist MPLA government, while the US and apartheid South Africa backed UNITA rebels. While the Cold War ended, proxy wars did not. Instead, they have become more intricate, involving not just two superpowers but a web of competing interests from regional players such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and China. Civil unrest or ethnic tensions create an opening. Weak states, undergoing internal turmoil, become prime targets. They pick a proxy to back, a faction aligned with their interests, rebels, militias, or governments. In Syria, for example, Russia backed the Assad regime while the US supported rebel groups. In order to fuel the fight, they provide weapons, cash, and intelligence to prolong the conflict. The goal is not always victory, but attrition, draining the opponent's resources. The Soviets and China armed North Korea in 1950-1953 but avoided direct combat. The US responded with troops under a UN banner, leading to massive destruction. Result? A stalemate that killed millions, with Stalin cynically prolonging the war to drain US resources. Today's sponsors often fight each other's proxies rather than their own forces. In Syria, for instance, Russia-Iran backed Assad. The US supported Kurdish groups. Turkey fought both Assad and the Kurds. Why are proxy wars so destructive? Unlike traditional wars, proxy conflicts resist resolution due to external lifelines. Patrons keep factions fighting long after they'd normally collapse. Example: Yemen's war has raged for 9+ years due to Saudi and Iranian support. No clear winners. With multiple backers, peace deals collapse, e.g. Libya's failed truces. Humanitarian catastrophes. Civilians suffer sieges, starvation, and mass displacement. Syria. 500,000+ dead. 12 million displaced. The deadly equilibrium is that proxy wars reach a balance where they can burn for decades. External sponsors do just enough to keep them going, but never enough to end them. In the Ukraine War, 2022 to date. While Russia directly invaded, it also used separatist groups in Donetsk and Luhansk for years, blurring the line between direct and proxy war. In the Sudan conflict, 2023. The UAE funds the RSF militia, while Egypt backs the Sudanese military, turning the country into another proxy battleground. Proxy wars aren't going away. They offer too many advantages for powerful states: deniability, cost-effectiveness, and strategic leverage. But the consequences are dire. They include eroded sovereignty. Weak states become permanent battlegrounds. Escalation risks, miscalculations like in the NATO-Russia clashes, could spark wider wars. Moral hazard. Sponsors face no consequences for atrocities committed by their proxies. Is there a path forward? Due to the influential power of the nations pulling the strings behind proxy wars, preventing them is no easy feat. A 2020 study on proxy warfare by the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights calls upon the UN Security Council to exercise its power and responsibility to impose sanctions on countries that are directly responsible for illegal actions in conflicts and restrict support to perpetrators from supplier states by implementing measures like arms embargoes, trade blocks on weapons. Yet even the UN Security Council has been powerless in such instances, often finding its attempts blocked by its 5 permanent veto-wielding members: China, France, Russia, the US, and the UK, otherwise known as the P5. These 5 nations were responsible for more than 73% of major arms exports between 2014 and 2018, during which the Middle East received over 35% of those imports. In December 2016, due to the lack of council action to issue an arms embargo for Syria, the UN General Assembly established the International, Impartial, and Independent Mechanism, IIM. The purpose of the IIM is to assist in the investigation and prosecution of individuals responsible for the most serious crimes under international law that have been committed in Syria since March 2011. The IIM has documented the misuse of armaments by parties but is powerless in preventing illegal arms exports. Different studies require establishing an independent third-party investigator to ensure compliance with laws of armed conflict and the UN Charter regarding the source and use of conflict armaments. Strengthen arms controls. Limit weapons flows to conflict zones. Target patrons. Sanctions or diplomatic pressure on nations fueling wars. Invest in mediation. Neutral brokers, like the UN, must have more leverage. In conclusion, it is important to note that there are shadow wars that define our age. The 21st century's defining conflicts won't be fought on traditional battlefields. They'll be dirty, protracted wars in forgotten corners of the world, bankrolled by distant capitals. Proxy warfare lets great powers compete without overt war, but at the cost of millions trapped in violence with no end in sight. As citizens, we must ask, will we tolerate this indirect bloodshed, or demand accountability from those pulling the strings? The answer will shape whether the coming decades are marked by fragile peace or endless, hidden wars. Beyond the chessboard of global politics, proxy wars take a toll on everyday lives. Families lose homes, children lose schools, and entire communities are displaced. The consequences of displacement linger far beyond the headlines, leaving scars that will take generations to heal. While the world focuses on conflicts in the Middle East and Europe, underreported wars in Africa are creating humanitarian crises of epic proportions, deeply affecting people, livelihoods, and regional stability. In Sudan, what began as a power struggle between two rival generals in 2021 has escalated into a full-scale conflict, claiming over 15,000 lives, displacing millions, and now posing a threat of spillover into an already volatile region. To improve the situation, various entities, including the UN, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, a regional bloc in the Horn of Africa, the United States, and the African Union, have made efforts to bring the warring factions to the negotiation table to establish a lasting peace and truce. One of the reasons the talks keep collapsing is because there are powers and proxies of war outside Sudan that do not want the talks to succeed, because they have vested interest in the country. Given Sudan's strategic location on the Red Sea, he added, and its rich agricultural land and resources, including gold, livestock, oil, Arabic gum, and cotton, all highly demanded in the Middle East, the stakes are extremely high. Africa must ask, will they tolerate this indirect bloodshed or demand accountability from those pulling the strings? The answer will shape whether the coming decades are marked by fragile peace or endless, hidden wars.